So up until now, every time we have run any of these queries, we've just been working with one table, but it's now time to join two tables. And if we join two or more tables together, then you can put a lot more information together. So let's try this. Let's make a query. Let's go to the Create tab, Query Design. And under our tables this time, we're going to add two. We're first going to add appointments, double click, stretch it out a little bit, and also do treatment cost. Now notice there's this little join line that says, hey, these two fields are the same. And next week, that's going to mean something to you. But at this point, just notice that they have this join line that connects them. So what we want to do is select from the first table appointment date, double click to go down here, and treatment, let's see, we're going to pick treatment from this side, treatment over here, and animal type and cost. And let me show you our results, but I'm going to first sort these into ascending, both of these under appointment date and ascending. Now when I run it, notice we just don't have an appointment saying we're getting some treatment costs, treatment called, 038. We now know that on January 10th, we're going to do a dog wellness exam on a dog, and it's going to cost $50. So by combining the two, it means a lot more. Let's go ahead and save this and hit yes. We're going to call this appointments and treatments as the query name, and save that query right down there. Okay, and now go back and find that appointments and treatments query, double click it and reopen it. And we're going to change something called the join properties. This shows just the 5 records that had an appointment date with the associated treatments. But if I go back to view and design view, remember this little join line. What we're going to do now is right click on this join line. And what we're going to select from this, let me make sure I'm just right on that, is go to the join properties, and this opens. Right now, if you notice number 1, the radio button, it says only include rows where the join fields from both tables are equal. In other words, if you had 5 appointment dates, show the 5 treatments. But if we wanted to see all the records from the treatment cost and those records also which have appointments, we can choose this third one. So let me go ahead, after picking option button 3, I'm going to now click OK, and let's run it. And now what we get is the 5 with appointments, but it's also going to show us all the other treatments that no one has an appointment for right now. So we kind of get both of these. Let's go ahead and save these, say yes, and now appointments and treatments will join both of those. So now we're going to combine all of our superpowers into one. I want to make sure, first of all, you've clicked one time here on appointments and treatments. Don't forget, that's the query we just made. We're going to go up to the Create tab, but this time, finally, not going to click Query Design. We want to show our results from this query into a report. And if you remember from last week, a report very often is going to be printed, shown to the whole company, that type thing. So this time, we're going to come over here to Report Wizard. And it's saying, okay, you want the query appointments and treatments, which fields? I want them all, so I can hit this double arrow right here. I'll click next and next again. And it says, hey, do you want to sort any of these? So we're not going to, we already had it sorted before, so we don't need to. So I'll hit next. And I'm going to make sure tabular is selected in portrait. Click next. And we're going to get rid of the current title right here because we're just going to add the word report on the end of it. And let's hit finish. And now we can preview that report. It's kind of the same idea that we saw before, but notice like at the bottom, it's got today's date on it and the time and all that type of thing. Well, actually not the time, but the page number. So this might be nice. And now when I close this, you already named it earlier, so now it's right here. It's called the appointments and treatments. And if I wanted to print this right now, I could go to File and Print and be good with it. Next, I also want to create a form for a query. So let's go to the Create tab. And what we're going to pick here is this word form. We still, by the way, have appointments and treatments selected. So when I click Form, notice it turns this into forms. Notice there's 15 at the bottom down here. I could click through. And now when I go to save this, I can actually just call this, I'll hit yes and call it form. Oh, actually, I'm going to leave the name appointments. I should have left that name in there, and treatments form. So we now have it saved. Let me show you where it goes. It comes right down here. We have appointment and treatments form all saved. Next, I want to take that query, and what I actually want to do is turn it into an Excel spreadsheet. Remember, we learned Excel last month. So by clicking appointments and treatments right here, I can come over here to external data, but this time I don't want to import anything in. I want to export it out. That means to a spreadsheet in this case. So I'm going to click Excel right here. And it says, hey, where do you want this to go? I'll just let it go to downloads. I want it as an Excel spreadsheet and hit OK. And I don't need to save the steps. And if I go to my downloads folder right now, I now have, there it is, appointments and treatments saved. So if I open this up, I now have pushed this out to become a saved spreadsheet. And a lot of times, you know what I mean? Sometimes you want to use things as a spreadsheet, maybe to do the math and add up the cost. So it works out pretty well. Let's reopen the appointments and treatments query, not report or form. And I'm going to go into, go back into the design view here. So down to design view. And what I want to do here is just restrict what records I want in the join. I just want the ones that cost more than $10. So I'm going to come down to the criteria line here, put a greater than sign in, type the number 10 and run it. And now if you notice, we don't have any, the cheaper treatments that were like $10. So now when it asks me to close the query, we're going to say no and not save that. But I did want to show you how we could add criteria to that. Next, onwards into calculations. Calculations, I think, are one of the toughest parts of this chapter. And when we have the test in a few weeks, calculations are definitely going to be on there. So here's what we're going to do. Let's click Create. We're going to go to Query Design. For the very first time, we're going to go into the table called Veterinarian Vendors. Remember, this is the one that we pulled in from the outside access file. Let's go ahead and stretch that out. And I want you to, let's go ahead and double click on vendor name. Next, let's pick state. Let's go to veterinarian supply. Let's do quantity, and let's do cost fields. So we pull them all down to the bottom. Well, I could run this, as you know, but this time I kind of want to do a little bit of a formula in here. If I were to run it right now, let me show you where I am. This would show me that, for example, Duncan Veterinarian Supplies out of Colorado, they sell the feline rabies vaccine. For 50 of them, if I were to buy 50, they cost $4 each. Now, how much is that total? I bet you do the math in your head and say, okay, it would cost us $200, 50 times 4. But what I want to do is create a column right here that actually does that calculation. And I have to tell you, Excel is better at calculations, but in this case, we can still do calculations in Access. Let me show you how. I'm going to go back into the design view, and I'm going to go to the first empty column, this one right here. I'm going to click right there. Now, I could type this formula in right here, but it's a little hard to see. So here's how I always do it. I right click in that first column, first line, go to the word zoom. Zoom just means make this bigger. There we go. And how we're going to type the formula in is, first of all, what do I want to call this column? I'm going to call it total cost. And instead of using an equal sign, Access uses a colon. Those are those two dots. Spacing doesn't matter. So now I'm going to put in a square bracket. And the reason I'm putting a square bracket right here is I need to reference the two fields that I'm going to end up putting multiplied together. Do you see right here where I'm pointing? I need quantity and cost. I need them to be exact. So don't misspell quantity. So I'm going to type in quantity. By the way, once again, it doesn't matter if it's uppercase or lowercase. So I'm going to put in quantity. I'm going to double check that I spelled it right. Close my bracket. The bracket is indicative of a field name. So that's why we put square brackets around it. I put the time sign to show that I'm multiplying. Put the square bracket again, and now I want the word cost. Double check it's spelled right or it won't work. End of square bracket. By the way, the most common mistake that people do is they forget, they put the time sign inside of these. The multiplication, adding, whatever you're doing right here needs to be outside of the square brackets. Now let's click OK. There we go. There's our equation. Let's go ahead and hit run. And notice we now have a column called total cost. Remember, we put that in front of the colon. And it now multiplied 50 times 4 is 200, 65 times 8 is 520, and so forth. So now that we finally have that all put together, let's go ahead and save that after we put a caption in. So before I save this calculation, I want to change two labels. Let me show you which ones. Do you see right here where it says quantity and cost? I want just in this particular query for this to say vendor quantity and vendor cost, not like back in the table, just here. So to do that, let me go under the View tab, go into Design View. Right here, I'm going to click on quantity and not type it in because then it wouldn't match. I'm going to come up here again to Property Sheet. And in the property sheet right here, I want you to notice at the bottom, there's something that's called caption. Let me move this over so you guys can see it a little bit easier. And here where it says caption, I'm going to rename quantity to vendor quantity. So just in this particular instance, this is going to show up. And then I'm going to click right here under cost, go down to the caption here, and change it to vendor cost. So now when I have both of these in here and I hit run, notice, I'll spread these out so you can see them. It says vendor quantity and vendor cost. So now we have this in here. I'm ready to save. Let me hit close. Yes. I'm going to call this M02Q10. Good. You guys are doing great. Okay, guys, we just have a few left. Now, next, we want to calculate statistics. Statistics is a fancy word that does things like count how many records we have, maybe find the sum of a particular column, find the average, find the max, which if you remember from last chapter, largest value, min, smallest value, and even some other calculation statistics. Let me show you how to do that. We're going to create a new query. So I'll go under Create tab, Query Design. I'm going to go this time, let me close that property sheet. I want to go under the table for veterinarian vendors and stretch this out. And what I want to only double click on is cost. And you see cost down here. What I want to do is if I were to run it right now, look, there's all these separate costs, but I don't have a good average of what our costs are. So what I can do instead is come back here to Design View, and you will recognize something you learned in Excel. It's right up here in the ribbon. Go to the Show Hide Group or into the Design tab and click Totals. Remember, that was the old auto sum symbol. When you click Totals right here, what happens is it puts total down here, or this group by. So I'm going to click to the right of group by, and you'll notice you get this little drop down arrow. We could find the sum, the average, the min. Let me try sum and run it. It'll add them all together. And if I go back to design view, let's say we want to find the average, and you can see the min, max, count means how many. So in this case, we are going to do the average. So I'm going to run that right there. And now we have that. Let me add a little bit more to it. Let's now go down to design view. Now that we know how to do that average. And I have to tell you, there are a lot of these statistics and calculations on the test. So make sure you know this one. And what we're going to do is add one more field. We're going to add vendor name. And what I want to do is I'm going to compute the average cost, but by vendor name. So we're going to change the word group by to the word where. So where this vendor name is this, find the average. And I'm going to add the criteria of capital SAN wildcard. So let me make sense of this. We're going to find the average cost when the vendor's name begins with an SAN. Let's go ahead and run that. So the average cost is $8.75 for the cost of supplies for Sanchez Supplies. That's where we were getting that from. Let's go ahead and save this. Say yes, and we're going to call it M02Q11. Great. So we also want to be able to use something called grouping. Let's reopen that same item and open up M02Q11 and go back to design view. And we're going to clear this design grid. So in other words, we're going to highlight both of these by holding down the shift key, coming up here, and we're going to clear the grid by just hitting delete columns. So now there's nothing down there. So what we're going to do this time is double click vendor name, and we're also going to double click cost. Now, if I were to run it right now, I'm not done, but if I were to run it right now, it would tell me my 5 vendors and the cost of their products. But let's say I want that to come up in this case with the average. So I'm going to come back here to design view, and I'm going to change the cost to the average cost. Good. So now we're saying, okay, I wanted to see each vendor name and the average cost. So now when I run it, I get those average cost. Let's go ahead and save this as a different name. So to save that query, we can go to File and Save As, pick that object and save it with the number, I'm going to get rid of that copy of, and change it to number 12. Well, you've made it to the last query. It's called a crosstab query. So what is this? Think of a crosstab query as a great way to kind of summarize everything. Let's say my college president, Dr. Capps, comes to me and says, Corinne, can you look through every student, every major, and find what is the most popular major for women who are between 18 and 22, and how many students graduate from that. So that's a lot of information to kind of put together. So a crosstab query would be helpful. Let me show you how to do a crosstab query. I'm going to hit the Create tab. And this time, for once, I'm not going to hit Query Design. I'm going to click something different, Query Wizard. And notice right here, the second item is this Crosstab Query Wizard. I click OK. Now it's saying, okay, what items do you want to look at here? Well, I'm going to look at the table called Veterinarian Vendors. I'm going to hit Next. And it says, okay, what fields do you want to look at? Well, the one thing I want to look at is I want to kind of figure out where people are all working from, which zip code, or in our case, let's go with state. State. So I'll throw that over. So I want to know by state. Remember, they're in Colorado and Utah. And notice when I put state here, it now says, hey, I'm going to list all your states. Now look, it says state 1 from state 4. If you remember, we only have 2 states. It's just trying to show you that if you've had more states, it would do that. We're going to hit the next button. And what else do you want to compare? Well, I want to see the vendors who are by state. So I want to click vendor name right here. Do you see across here? It suddenly says vendor name. I hit the next button and it says, okay, you want to look at the states, you want to look at the vendors. What do you want to compare about them? I want to look at how much their cost is. So let me go ahead and click cost right here. And it says, hey, do you want to find the average of that cost? Do you want to find the min? I want to find the sum. And as soon as I pick cost and sum here, do you see it showing up? So our final is going to be states on the left, vendors across the top, and each one of them is going to have that sum cost. So I hit next. I'm going to make sure the name says veterinarian vendors crosstab. I didn't change it, so it's good. And I hit finish. Now, I know it doesn't look like a lot of results, but this is a lot of information. It looks like in Colorado, our total cost for all of our companies is $15.75 on average. In Utah, it's $34 on average. And then we can see the individuals, Duncan, Gaines, Mays, Rodriguez, Sanchez. So it gives you a lot of information. Now, this is already has a name, so we can just close it. And let me show you where it is. Here is that Crosstab Query, so it's saved automatically. The very, very last thing we want to do is just show you how to work on this navigation pane. This pane on the left is called the navigation pane, and every once in a while, a student during the test will accidentally hit the shutter bar right here, like that, and go, oh my goodness, I've lost everything. You haven't. If you click on the shutter bar again, it reopens. And right here where it says all access objects, you can look at different ways of looking at it. Like we could look at just the queries right now, or we could look at just the tables, or we could look at all access objects, or we could search for something. Don't forget at companies, sometimes you get a lot of information. If I wanted to type AP, now it's showing me anything that starts with the word appointments. So let's backspace out of that, get everything back. We're going to close access without it saves automatically. So we just click the X up here, guys. Okay, you made it. Everybody, let's do the happy dance here real quick. Hopefully you have a great week. As always, email me if you get stuck. Everybody stay safe. Ciao.